Hello, good viewer. It is I, Onion Creature, and today is a good day because it is a day on which I'm going to review a new Kirby game. That being Kirby's Dream Buffet. This is an eShop release that just came out August 17th, and it's a 4-player multiplayer spin-off available for $15. Without further ado, let's go to the section in which I talk about the game. We're going to talk about Kirby's Dream Buffet, which is an eShop title recently released in celebration of the 30th anniversary of the Kirby series. This title was announced randomly on Twitter one day, and I thought, hey, wow, what a cool game. I didn't have that many thoughts on it, but I did think it had quite a bit of promise, and I really hoped that it would live up to that. Now, having played it, I can actually say it really did. It kind of exceeded my expectations, especially for the price point it's at. I'm really impressed by this game. It's quite cool. I think, first of all, this is a pretty great celebration for the 30th anniversary of the series. It's themed around cake specifically, which has gone hand in hand with previous anniversaries in the series. So I'm kind of guessing that HAL made this game in part to celebrate the occasion, which feels very appropriate, and it means we get 2 whole new Kirby games this year. And that's really great. This is the first spin-off since Kirby Battle Royale to not be based on a sub-game. There hasn't been an original Kirby spin-off on the Switch system until now. And what a spin-off it is. I think you could maybe say that this game could have been inspired by or branched off from Kirby Tilt and Roll from Forgotten Land, but that's a bit of a stretch, and even if it was based on that minigame, this version of it is pretty distinct from that, so the connection is tenuous at best. With that being said, I think I can say that this is the first original Kirby spin-off on the Nintendo Switch system, which is a pretty cool occasion. I love Kirby spin-offs. We definitely do get some, but the recent ones have been, again, updated versions of sub-games, which is cool, but not necessarily the most exciting, and it's a lot more fun, I think, to get something that's more wholly original and doesn't borrow gameplay from the standard 2D main series entries. So it was announced earlier this summer, and then we had the Kirby 30th Anniversary Music Fest, in which Shinya Kumazaki came on stage to announce that it was being released on August 17th, for $15. What a cool way to announce a Kirby game being released. I think that was really fun and made that event feel even more special. The pricing is surprisingly great. This is technically the cheapest Kirby game on the Nintendo Switch, not counting Super Kirby Clash, which is free to start. In terms of paid experiences, this is the cheapest you can get, and that's surprising because it's actually an incredibly strong experience that I like quite a bit more than the previous Switch spin-offs. The amount of content included is comparable to those other games, but the gameplay style is really fresh and new, and it has a lot of replayability and different unlockables. It doesn't really have a strong single-player component. This is one of the most multiplayer-focused Kirby games ever, and I think that's fine because the multiplayer really is the star of the show, so single-player content isn't really all that needed. You're able to play multiplayer modes with bots in single-player, and I think that's totally fine, and gives you something to play if you don't have access to the internet at the time, such as if you're in the car or something like that. Let's get into the music, which is a really strong point for this game. I'm really pleased with the direction they went. There's a lot of original tracks which sound pretty nice. They kind of remind me of some of the tracks that were created for the Kirby Cafe, which is appropriate since this is also a game based around food. They seem similar in style to that, and there's a lot of original ones which are pretty nice sounding and sound unique to the series. But there's also quite a few remixes, and you get some standard ones. You know, there's a Green Greens remix, a Meta Knight remix, so that's all good stuff you'd come to expect. But there's also some new remixes for some of the more obscure Kirby spin-offs, specifically the spin-offs in which Kirby is a ball, because of course Kirby is in fact a ball in this game as well. There's new remixes from Kirby's Block Ball, Kirby's Pinball Land, and Kirby's Star Stacker. These tracks have never been remixed before in an official capacity, so hearing a remix of a stage theme from Block Ball while playing this was a really magical experience. I was not expecting them to dig that deep in the back catalog of Kirby games, just because they've never really addressed those tracks before in any way, and they seemed to be mostly forgotten until now. That was one minor nitpick I had about the Kirby 30th Anniversary Music Fest, is that I felt it was a bit lacking in terms of spin-off music, and I felt that it would have been a really cool time to bring back some more obscure tracks from those Game Boy spin-offs and some of the other spin-offs that have been largely forgotten about in terms of musical remixes, such as Block Ball Pinball Land. There was a Dream Course track in the Music Fest and a few other spin-offs, but none of the more obscure Game Boy titles were really included. So I was even more surprised to see them here. It filled me with great joy upon hearing those for the first time, and hopefully this sets a precedent for them to appear more in the future. Some really underrated tracks are included in this game, and it makes me feel happy inside. There's also a surprising amount of different composers which worked on this title. Basically every Kirby composer that is currently working on the series seems to have contributed, and that's really awesome. And you can kind of tell who made each track based on the color-coded musical notes that appear when you play the unlockable music discs that they created the track for. And you can look up online which color corresponds to the different composers. The visuals in Dream Buffet are strikingly beautiful. Nintendo games tend to have really good-looking food levels. For example, Sweet Sweet Canyon in Mario Kart 8 looks amazing. It looks very, very tasty. I want to eat all of it. There's been food levels in different Kirby games. One of my favorite Pikmin 3 challenge levels is one where you're on top of a pizza and there's lots of other different food stuff around. It's just fun. It's really amusing and charming to play around in these giant food environments from the perspective of the player. You're like a little creature crawling around these giant food things. It's just a great aesthetic, and choosing that for a Kirby game is just too appropriate, since the series revolves around Kirby's obsession with food. There have been whole games where Kirby goes on a mad rampage because his strawberry shortcake was stolen. It's just a constant theme. Now we have a full game that is based around that theme, and that just makes too much sense. There's some great details in the stages. There's quite a few different variants of the stages. For example, you can have a chocolate variant or a strawberry variant. That's pretty cool. And also, when you're rolling around in frosting as Kirby, he starts to get covered in that color frosting, or it could be syrup or other substances. It's just cute and it's just fun, and I like it. Also, quite a few different stages for these different mini games and final battles. They're not all just sweet. You have some savory stuff, which includes these really tasty looking burgers, different burger ingredients. Like, I'm not really into all these tomatoes and stuff, but by God, do they look good in this game, and makes me reconsider that. There's some tasty looking savory stuff here too, which is refreshing when you've been looking at cakes for like 20 minutes. Nice to get some sandwiches in there. Bacon. God, the bacon looks good. There's hot dogs. All different forms of food are accounted for, which is good. Maybe not that many vegetables, just minor vegetable inclusion, and mostly just sweet stuff and bit of meat. These visuals do come at a cost, as the game only runs at 30 frames per second, which has become the standard Switch Kirby game frame rate, unfortunately. I do understand that these games are presumably demanding on the hardware, and so the lower frame rate is understandable to a degree. However, it is unfortunate, especially when other Nintendo titles are able to reach 60 with pretty great visuals as well, such as Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and Super Mario Odyssey. Another drawback is that it only has 2-player split-screen multiplayer for local, and there is no version of online which can be played with more than one player per system. So if you want to play with others online, it has to be 1 player per system, which is a bit of a shame, and that's something that other Nintendo games have, such as Mario Kart 8 and Smash Bros. There is no 4-player split-screen, which is pretty sad. I think that should have been there. HD Rumble here is really well implemented. This is probably the best HD Rumble game any Kirby game has had. It's pretty persistent, which is something I'd like to see. Basically, when you roll around as Kirby, you can kind of feel him rolling around the environment, and the different strawberries you collect add little rumbles when you collect them. It just works really well, and it's effective, and it's fun. It just fits very well, and I hope to see this level of commitment to HC Rumble in future Kirby titles because it really enhances the experience. There's also some different emotes you can use, and that's something that's carried over from Forgotten Land, and I like these different emotes. They're pretty expressive and cute, and I like the one where Kirby's eyes bug out like in the opening of Forgotten Land, and a few other occasions across the series. He gets those giant bugged out eyes, which is pretty hilarious looking. In terms of the main racing mode, there are 4 different sections which are presented at the start of each match as a menu. There are 2 racing stages, 1 minigame stage, and a final battle stage. The goal of the Grand Prix is to eat the most strawberries and become the most obese so that you tip the scales in your favor, your weight at the end. If you're the heaviest, Kirby, god damn it, you're gonna win, and that's the goal. The star mode is racing, of course. It's the most fleshed out and lengthy, but the final battle is pretty great too, as are the minigames. They help to mix things up. Strangely, even though the game only supports 4 players at a time, there are 4 Waddle Dees which appear at the start of each race and quote-unquote compete. I say that because they're basically absent from races except at the very beginning, because they're just really slow and don't add much, and I wonder why they were included, because yeah, they're just not prevalent at all. The only thing they really do is provide a bit of an obstacle at the start of a match. Like if you bump into them, it can slow you down, but that's pretty easy to avoid if you're trying to, and other than that, they really don't do much. So it's a bit strange. Maybe 8 players were planned at some point but were cut. I don't know. Hopefully that's an indication that maybe 8-player multiplayer will be added down the line. I don't think so, but they do have cute little names, like different Waddle Dee variants of Kirby names, which is funny and I like, and they can have different hats. It's pretty cool. The game has ways of preventing players from getting too far ahead in the races, that being the cookie walls which appear, and these basically are a stopgap so that players who are further behind don't get left in the dust, and that works pretty well, but there are also ways to bypass it, specifically by using jelly, and it's kind of strategic how you approach these. You can either try to break down the wall really quickly so that you can go ahead, or you can wait for other players and collect strawberries in the meantime so that you get a higher strawberry count. So there's different ways to approach it. It's a little bit strategic, which I like to see. That's a fun thing to have. The minigame stages are focused on collecting strawberries, of course, and the specific manner in which you do that is by defeating enemies or collecting ones which fall from the sky. There's also these teacup stages where the strawberries will appear in different teacups. They're very short. It's just a little stopgap between the races, and I think that works fine. The final battle is by far the most chaotic. There's tons of different abilities and special effects and things happening. There's these tongs which appear, which will grab you if you are the biggest Kirby at the time and have the most strawberries. That's a way of keeping you on your toes if you're in first. It's really easy to get in a cycle of being knocked out over and over again, which can be frustrating, but there are ways of avoiding it. I think I was able to negate that by increasing my experience and skill level. It's just about being strategic and careful, and you know, obviously there's an element of luck in there. There's enough randomness in there to keep things interesting. The implementation of copy abilities is pretty great. They function similarly to Mario Kart item boxes. These item boxes provide different abilities, each of which is themed around a different food. For example, jelly makes you a jelly thing, and you can pass through walls and slow down players by expelling jelly from yourself. There's also burning, which gives you a hot chili pepper, and when you use it, you go off in a spiral of flames. There's also tornado, which is a cupcake thing that spins around, so on and so on. It's pretty fun. You can also get rarer abilities if you are further behind, such as multiple copies of burning or wheel, which is a donut, pretty funny. There's also high jump, which is this little jelly gummy worm thing. If you use it, you can kind of skips portions of the stage. I've only ever gotten far enough behind to get this once. Never gotten it any other time, so it's pretty rare, pretty uncommon, but that's just a fun little thing. And it's also the case that if you're in first, you're much more likely to get less good items and less of them, as well as just strawberries, which don't really help you gain any momentum really or combat prowess, but it's good to get strawberries. So it's just a way of balancing things. You know, similar systems have been seen in Mario Kart and other racing games. For some reason, the drill ability is pretty uncommon in the final battles. I can understand why it wouldn't be in the races, but I've only gotten it to appear once, which was weird. But yeah, that's one that's pretty rare. I don't know why, but it is. One interesting detail about the mechanics of the game is that the more strawberries you collect and the larger you become determines how fast you can go. So if you're extremely large, you can actually roll around more quickly than if you are a small Kirby, which incentivizes you obviously to collect strawberries, but does make it a bit more difficult if you're behind to catch up if you don't have as much strawberries. You are of course assisted by better items if you're further behind, and also the ability to float longer. This game has a system where if you fall off the stage, you can tap the A button to come back, and the larger you are, the less time you have to get back to the stage. So if you're just a small Kirby, you'll be able to get back easier. It's sort of a risk-reward mechanic in that you have to be more careful if you are larger than if you are smaller. Also, if you're very large during the battles, it's much easier to knock you off the stage with abilities, and you will also lose more strawberries than if you were a small Kirby. So that's some of the ways the game balances things out. The player who reaches the finish line first in the racing stages will be able to get to the 50 strawberry high cake, and they will be able to eat it all, and you do a little thing where you spin the thumbstick around to get Kirby to eat all around the cake. And if you get there in second, you can get the 20 cake or the 10 cake if you're in third, and the last Kirby is forced to scrounge for scraps, which is very sad, but that's how it goes sometimes. After you've completed the final battle, there's an award ceremony in which different points are awarded. You can get 40-point awards for doing different things, such as hovering the most, eating the most 5-point strawberry bunches. There's also a few different types of fruits that can appear in stages, like blueberries or raspberries, and if you eat the most of those, sometimes there's an award for that. And once those have been awarded, the victor is decided based on who breaks the scales by being the fattest Kirby. I think the system works pretty well. It's similar to Mario Party in that it can be unfair at times, but that's just how it goes. And since the matches are pretty short to get through, it's not too frustrating because you can always just jump back into the next one, and maybe you'll have better luck then. Upon completion of matches, you will be awarded points which increase your ranking. Upon each rank increase, you are awarded an unlockable, which can be either a music disc, a stage, or costume / color palette for Kirby to wear. There are, I think, over 130 different unlockables, which is quite good, and while they are pretty easy to unlock at the start of the game, once you get further in, it will take more victories for enough points to be accrued in order for that threshold to be met, which is good. It encourages you to keep playing, and it's good design. Glad to see that. You can also unlock these treat items, which are basically different cookies or chocolates or sort of these jelly objects. I don't really know exactly what that is, but it's a jelly, I think. But they have different Kirby artwork printed on them, and that can be pixel art or game artwork, or even some non-game artwork like the 30th anniversary logo or the Kirby Cafe logo. You can use these to decorate a cake in the central hub area. The treat you place at the top will appear underneath you at the start of racing stages. I chose to have Grill from Kirby Star Stacker on the Super Famicom, as it is labeled in the game, because I gotta represent those obscure Kirby spin-offs. Grill, of course, came from one of the only Kirby games never to leave Japan, and it is now playable in international areas through a Nintendo Switch Online subscription and by making a Japanese account. I made a whole video about that. If you want to play Kirby Star Stacker on the Nintendo Switch, you can now do so. Fallen Block puzzle game, it's fun. The costumes are pretty great. There's a lot of variety and lots of different character-themed ones like Meta Knight, Waddle Dee. They have the Animal Friends, lots of other ones. And there's also quite a few different palettes for Kirby. Nice different colors, and some of them have like really creepy opaque eyes with no pupils, and it's disturbing, but also funny. I really like the Waddle Doo one. It just completely hides Kirby's face. That's pretty cool. Interestingly enough, the yellow Kirby palette is labeled as Kibi Yellow, which is a term that has not actually officially before been used in a Kirby game, even though it's sort of been the de facto name for yellow Kirby for quite some time. So interesting to see that officially in a game, and that's a fun little detail there. There's also an online ranking system in which you can see how many points you have, and that determines, presumably, the difficulty of players you will encounter online. It starts at 15,000 and you can either go up or go down, and that's just great. That's something that has never been in a Kirby game before, if I'm not mistaken, and it's something you always want. For example, Mario Kart has that, Smash Bros has that, kind of, I guess. Kind of a weird version in Smash Bros. It's good to have for online games because it encourages you to try to get better. Speaking of online, this is the first Kirby game where it feels like online was built as a core pillar of the experience. Online has been in a few Kirby games before. The first time was Kirby Battle Royale, which is pretty crazy because that was only in, 2018? It hasn't been that long that Kirby games have had online, and none of them have really had a ranking system before like that. The online itself just feels like it's something that was intended to be a core part of the experience, and it's the only mode I've really played. I've not really dabbled in local multiplayer at all or single player all that much because there isn't that much to single player. The online itself fortunately does work pretty well most of the time in my experience. It's pretty low latency a majority of the time for me. Unfortunately, there are occasions in which it becomes very, very stuttery, and that makes it difficult to play and just an annoying experience. TBH, and there's no real way to back out of these matches without receiving a penalty. It'll give you a little message like, hey, you disconnected, you shouldn't do that. That's kind of annoying. That's a problem in a lot of other Nintendo games, which is unfriendly to the player because, if you're in a laggy match and it's just an unpleasant experience, and it's not your fault a lot of the time, obviously, if you disconnect, you're blamed for that problem, which is just not great, but also kind of expected from a Nintendo game because this is something that is in a lot of them, and it's kind of annoying. There's also this free roll mode, which is just a minor little inclusion. It just gives you something to do in single player, and you just kind of explore around, and you can use different copy abilities and collect strawberries. It's pretty basic, but the environment they built for it is nice. It's just something to mess around with once or twice at least. One thing that I want to mention is that I do hope that more content to this game is added, though I accept the fact that that is very, very unlikely. Most Kirby games do not get post-launch downloadable content. I don't expect this to be an exception, which is kind of sad because it would be a perfect candidate for that. Adding a whole new stage or new costumes or treats to collect would be really great, but I don't see that happening. Whatever, the base content here is fine enough, especially for the cheap price. Overall, this is a really great spin-off, one of the best in years, and I think it provides the greatest Kirby multiplayer experience since Air Ride, probably. Obviously, you have multiplayer in the form of co-op in Return to Dreamland, and then recently in Star Allies, as well as Forgotten Land. But in terms of competitive multiplayer, where the game is solely focused on delivering a competitive multiplayer experience in a party setting, because it's Kirby, so it's never going to be too competitive, I think this is the best since Air Ride, and it's also kind of a racing game like Air Ride, so I'm not going to say this is a full-on sequel to Air Ride, because it's not, but it wouldn't be incorrect to say it shares a lot of elements with it, and is the closest thing we've gotten to an Air Ride 2 thus far. No city trial, but hey, this is just a really great Kirby party game, and I think it's just super fun. I mean, in some ways, you could probably argue that it's better than Air Ride. I think the core quote-unquote racing mechanics, it's not exactly a racing game, but it kind of is. It's a different form of racing than Air Ride had with vehicles, but I kind of feel like it's stronger gameplay there because Air Ride does kind of have a problem where the game basically plays itself a lot of the time. Not in all cases, and on higher difficulties it's a bit different, but yeah, it never felt like the most polished racing experience, and the best part of it was City Trial, which allowed you to explore this environment, and it wasn't exactly the mechanics themselves that made it fun, it was the element of exploration and upgrading your craft. Not to disparage Air Ride too much, I do love that game, it's one of the best Kirby spin-offs. In terms of core mechanics, I think Dream Buffet is stronger and more polished, and also probably more replayable, at least in terms of the main racing modes. City Trial is obviously very replayable, but just racing on your own in Air Ride on the base stages isn't the most replayable thing, in my opinion. The racing in Dream Buffet is better and more fun. I just really loved it. I am going to continue playing this, which is great. I do hope the online community stays reasonably active, unlike the previous online communities in Kirby multiplayer games like Fighters 2 and Battle Royale, which are totally dead, which is sad, but that's how it goes, I guess, for fairly obscure Nintendo online titles. They tend to just die off pretty quickly. I do hope that Dream Buffet endures a bit longer, because I'd love to keep playing this game for years to come online, and I think online is a great way to play it. It does have ways of playing with friends. You can use a password. It's kind of weird, you can't just play with friends from your friends list, and you have to use the code, but whatever. I mean, the end result is the same. Play with your friends. I think that's all my thoughts on it. I'm going to hand it off to live action onion creature to finish off the video. Well then, that was a laugh and a half. I'm finally done talking about this wonderful little game. It brought me great joy, and hopefully if you played it, it brought you joy too, and maybe you're gonna play it in the future. And if so, I recommend that, because it's fun. Better than I expected even, which is cool. Always fun when a game surprises you by how good it is. Just like this one did. Well, I've got some more videos planned. That might not be for a bit, but hey, I'll see you then. Well, these lights make the room very hot, so I'd say it's about time to stop recording, because I'm dying of heat exhaustion.